everyone, and welcome once again to our episode this month in June 2025 to Emma Explores. I'm Barbara Etienne and delighted to welcome my co host here, Emma Cox from Journeys into Genealogy, who will share with us some clever, creative ways in which she's been exploring her family stories and discovering some interesting tidbits she will share with us, as well as how she got there. So once again, welcome, Emma, and let me turn it over to you. Go ahead, please, Emma.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I'll just share my screen. Just give me one moment. So here we go. So today I'm going to be talking about Rosalinda and Gylby. Now, I know that Barbara, in the information she put out about this, one Rosalinda, but there's more than one in my tree, and I wanted to explore that further and just let you know about them. So just for anybody who's not familiar with me, my name is Emma Cox. I'm based in Kent in England, and I'm a family historian and genealogist. And I love family history, and I love helping people put together trees, charts, investigate DNA, all sorts of different things. I also host a podcast called Journeys into Genealogy, and there's about 110 episodes on there now, so all sorts of different things on there. So this is Great Aunt Rosa. So I grew up with Great Aunt Rosa. So she is a marble statue that's probably about 2 to 3 feet high. She's not small. And she used to sit next to my grandparents' swimming pool. So every time we went there in the summer, we used to live quite nearby. And although swimming in England isn't that common given weather, etc., we did actually go swimming. And she used to sit there. And so she was always known as Great Aunt Rosa. And I had no idea who Great Aunt Rosa was. She was just this family name with this statue. My cousin has actually got her now. And unfortunately, as you can see in this image, her nose has not survived unscathed. The rest of her is in pretty good condition, but just not her nose. And I love the thing, I think we would describe it as a mop cap or a mob cap that she's actually wearing with what looks like roses on it. So Great Aunt Rosa, so who was she? So her full name was Rosalinda Alicia de Grenier de Fonblanc, and she was born on the 5th of July 1822 in Hammersmith. And her father was John Samuel Martin Fonblanc, and his wife, Caroline O'Connell, she was from Ireland. He was English. And she had one older brother, John William Martin, born in 1820, and a younger one, Albany Bentham John, born in 1829. So not a big family for those days. I'm not sure if they lost other children on the meantime, but there's no record of those. These are the three that I know of. So I'm actually related to her twice. So this is where it starts getting slightly complicated. I'm just going to have a drink. So the complication slightly here is that my grandmother's maiden name was Fonblanc, and she's Great Aunt Rosa from her husband, my grandfather. So she's my grandfather's 2 times great aunt. So that's where we get the Great Aunt Rosa, but she's also my grandmother's grandmother. So this all starts getting very complicated. So what I did was I put together a little chart to try and display this. So this is what is called pedigree collapse, which is where the same people appear more than once in your tree. So I've got various instances of this on here. So on the right-hand side, on the Cox side, you can see that there's William Charles Cox at the top, and his 2 sons, Edward William and William. I descend through both of those. So that's where I've got the pedigree collapse on that side. Now, Edward William Cox, he married Rosalinda Alicia de Fonblanc, Great Aunt Rosa. And they had Ada, who had Naomi, who was my great-grandmother. And you can see that Naomi and Percy were actually second cousins. So it gets quite complicated there, but there's also a further complication on the purple side on the left here. So on the Fonblanc side, I've mentioned these people before. So John William Martin Fonblanc was in his late 60s when his son was born. So basically, it's effectively skipped a generation there. So it's gone from having Henry Bennett Edwards and Ada are actually the same generation. Sorry, there is a missing generation on the Fonblanc side, and you've got JB de Fonblanc and Naomi are the same generation, but they're not the same age, but they're not the same generation, if that makes sense. So the people in the red box are my grandparents. So you can see that there are links. I've tried to use the colours explaining the link. So the purple line goes down to the Fonblancs and the blue line goes down to Coxes, and then you've got the Edwards feeding into that. So I've got these people on my tree. On the left-hand side, I've got JSM Fonblanc, who is my 3 and 4 times great-grandfather, and William Charles Cox, who is my 4 times great-grandfather twice. So trying to actually work this out was a complicated exercise, and I found that this was the best way of actually trying to display it. So you can see that makes for interesting family relationships there. And when you're trying to look into things like DNA and working out how much you share with somebody, you obviously share more where the same people are in the tree more than once. So this is how it all fits together. So then I started to look into more information about Rosalinda herself. So she married Edward William Cox on the 15th of August, 1844 in Marylebone in London, and they had 7 children. And the picture on the right, sorry, it's a little bit fuzzy, I didn't take that one. That's actually a memorial in the local church to them. So Ada was the eldest, and she survived, and she was born in 1845. Unfortunately, they then had various children who didn't survive. Florence lived until she was about 20. Ada was about 9. Alicia was about 9. Theobald was barely born, as was Theobald number 2. Then Harding, who survived, and Algernon Charles Plumtree, who again was very, very young. And I think the names and these things are just wonderful looking back at them all. And you think, well, they obviously tried with Theobald, he died, and then the next Theobald died. And so they gave up on that and they named him Harding. I don't know where that came from. There's obviously Edward would have been after his father. Algernon, no ideas where that one came from. So Edward was married before he married Rosalinda, and he had a son called Erwin. So there were the 3 children, Erwin, Ada, and Harding. They grew up together. And I actually purchased a book fairly recently, and it talks about Harding's childhood, and he mentions growing up with his brothers and sisters, which is lovely to have that. So this is where they actually lived. So this house is called Moat Mount, and it was in a place called Mill Hill, which is was north of London at the time and is actually part of North London. London has expanded an awful lot. Unfortunately, the house doesn't actually exist any longer. It became a ruin and was eventually taken down. So where did Rosalinda come from? From here, sorry, click. And what does the name mean? So there are 2 different names for Rosalinda. It translates as beautiful rose in Spanish and gentle horse in German. I'm not sure which one would have been chosen and why, but that's what the meanings are. But where did her name come from? Why was she called Rosalinda? So her grandmother in Ireland was Rosalinda Fitzgerald. So the Irish connection here. And I thought, okay, I'm going to find out a little bit more if I can about her and her family. So Rosalinda Fitzgerald was my 4 times great-grandmother. She was born in 1756 in a place called, I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, Clogheen in Muldoon in Cork in Ireland. She married David O'Connell sometime between 1765 to 70. I don't actually have her marriage record, and had around 13 children. Obviously, people in those days did have quite a lot of children. So between 1771 and 1799, so there was a big span of age between the eldest and the youngest children. And I actually did find her death notice in the Southern Reporter and Cork Commercial County Journal. So on the 14th instance in Dublin, Mrs. Rosalinda O'Connell, relict, meaning widow, of David O'Connell of Cork, Esquire. So she died. That was August 1834. So leading on from Rosalinda, I found 14 Rosalindas in my tree. So they're not all called Rosalinda. Some are Rosalind and some are Rosa. But I was actually quite surprised looking through how many people. And I haven't investigated everybody, but this is the ones that I've found so far. And I thought I'd draw you a little map to show you. So the one on the left-hand side is Ireland. The one on the right-hand side is England. So that's my line. The Rosalinda at the top. So her youngest daughter was Caroline, and she married John Samuel Martin. They had Rosalinda. Ada's middle name was Rosalind, and one of her daughters was called Constance Rosalind. And then her younger sister, Naomi, is actually my great-grandmother. So that's my side. So that's fairly straightforward. So I then started looking into the Irish side to try and find out more about it. So of Rosalinda Fitzgerald's 3 daughters, they each named their daughter Rosalinda. But not only the daughters, some of their sons named the children Rosalinda as well. So I've basically highlighted the different people in the different generations here. So you can see it goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of Rosalindas. So obviously there was some very, very, very strong family connection here where people actually thought, right, I'm going to carry on naming that. So you can see Phyllis O'Connell here. She married Edward or Edmund Coffey and had Rosalinda. She married Martin Ryan. They had Rosalinda. And then you've got the other ones here. James Butler, Baron Dunboyne. He married Eleanor or Ellen O'Connell. And then of their children, they had one who they called Rosalinda. And their 2 sons, 2 of their sons rather, not all of their sons because they had other sons, named their daughters Rosalinda. And one of their other daughters named their daughter Rosalinda. And then on the next generation, 2 of their sons named their daughters Rosalinda. So I was really quite surprised to find out. I thought, okay, there might be 5 or 6 or something like that, but I just kept finding more. And there are at least 9 other siblings in this generation along the top here. So there is a possibility for more. And there are 4 other siblings along here. So I was quite impressed with that, given it's not a very common name, but to find that many Rosalindas actually in my tree. Right, so that is Rosalinda. So the next name, I thought, right, okay, I want to be sort of fair here. I'll do 1 female name and 1 male name. And I came across this name and I just thought it's so unusual. Gylby hair sign. I've never heard of either the first name or the last name before I started doing this. And I thought, he's got to be unique. So he's actually my 3rd cousin twice removed, born in 1889, and he died in 1962. And I just thought it's such a wonderful name, Gylby hair sign. So he was born in Norwich in Norfolk to Henry Hairsign and Minnie Valentina Beadle. So she comes down the Beadle line, who is actually a Fonblanc descendant there. So you see there's some amazing names all within this. And I managed to find his baptism record. So he was born on the 3rd of June and baptized on the 11th of September 1889 to Henry and Minnie. And he was a commercial traveller. Their father was a commercial traveller. And I thought, okay, it's unusual, pretty unique, and they're unlikely to be other people. However, he was named after his grandfather, who was also literally Gylby hair sign. He was 1810 to 1882. So they overlapped slightly, or he overlapped with the Gylby's junior's father, obviously. And trying to find the records and work out which one was which, I had to be quite careful because I was thinking, I've got 1 name here. And then eventually I found out that the first one had died in 1882. And then it's like, yeah, we've got 2 different people here. He also had an uncle, Gylby, and an aunt who was called Rose Gylby hair sign. So we've got another connection there, Rosa. So they obviously like the name there. But that was it. I started looking, trying to find other people, seeing whether they named their children Gylby or anything like that when he did marry. But no, that was it. Gylby lasted for effectively 3 generations and nobody continued with the name after that. I did find various records relating to it, though. The census records from 1891 and 1901 are shown on the screen here. And funny enough, actually, the spelling, Gylby, it was actually, the transcriptions weren't bad, given that it was of quite an unusual name. Sometimes you expect there to be very strange transcriptions, but they either managed to be Gylby or Gilby, which is pretty good going, really. And so the father was a commercial traveller, Henry Hairsign, and he was born up in Yorkshire. So he obviously moved around for his work. And Gylby actually received a school prize. So I think that was for good behaviour. So he's shown at the bottom of the screen amongst other people there. So that's he went to Llandaff House School in Norwich and received that in 1897 from the newspaper article there. And then I found him on the 1911 and the 1939 censuses. So on the first one there, he's a boarder, he's single, and he's a clerk in a wholesale warehouse working for a drapery and shipping. And his grandfather actually, he was a silk merchant himself, I believe, or certainly a draper there. So Gylby carried on in the same line of business there. So you can see down the bottom there, you've got Gylby and Beatrice, who was also known as Betty. So one of the things to note on the 1939 register is that you will find if somebody's changed name for any reason, this was used for things like the National Health Service. You'll see different annotations on there. You might see changes of name where somebody has got married more than once sometimes. And there'll be links to other things. So this is actually a code, the writing in green there, and it has a meaning as to where you would need to go to find out more information about them. And the register is pretty good because it actually gives people's birth dates as well there. Not always accurate, but pretty good. And Gylby was actually in the Navy. So I managed to find various articles about him, and these helped find confirmation of different things about him. So we know that he was born in Norwich and his occupation was a traveller, and we've got his date of birth at the top right-hand side of the screen here. We know what his occupation was there. We know his physical characteristics. So we know he was 5'8.5". His chest was 34.5. He had black hair, grey eyes, and a fresh complexion. We also know what ships he served on and the period of engagement. So he was taken on the 22nd of January 1915 for hostilities. So basically whilst World War I was undergoing. And it says on the right-hand side here, various comments about different things here. So had military service prior to entry. And then you can see the different ships that he served on here. And you can actually find out the different things about where they went and what they actually did as part of the war. And the second one I found actually gave me his military service number. So you can see here it's got, I think that's PI 40993. One of the things to be aware of with military service numbers is they did get reused and that they weren't necessarily unique. And certain regiments might have had the same numbers. So you need to try and be careful when you're looking at things there. So on this one, it says his appointment was terminated on the 14th of January 1918, and he was put onto the reserve list. He also gave his address here, so 79 Earlham Road in Norwich. And it said that he was promoted. So down the bottom here, we've got a date. It was put into the London Gazette in 1917, and that he was a temporary, I think that is a petty officer, temporary petty officer, and I think that's a 6, and that also means something. So if you look up military ranks, you can find out more about that. And that came into effect on the 1st of September 1917. And here we actually have the article that was in the Gazette. So it tells us Gylby Hairsing, 25th of January 1918, and he was serving on something called ML136. Which is this particular ship here. I actually found this image online. So this is a Royal Navy Fairmile B-class motor launch ML136 designed for harbour defence and submarine chasing. And this picture shows it on patrol off Fort William in 1944, so sometime after, and that was the Second World War. But I thought it was amazing to actually find an image of the ship that he actually served on there. So it's worthwhile looking if you see something on the screen here, like ML37 or 382, just to see if there are other images. If not, this image here would actually show you what it looked like. And then we have that he was demobbed. So he basically left the Navy on the 8th of April, 1919. And you can see his rank at the time was a temporary lieutenant. And in 1930, he married Beatrice Elizabeth Rothway, who was actually born Atto, so she was a widow at the time. So this was an older marriage after childbearing age, pretty much. Although, having said that, people did have them in later life there. But you can see on this, his profession is a silk merchant, and he's residing at the Charing Cross Hotel. His father is a merchant who's died, and her father was a gentleman, and they've both signed the register, and there's a couple of witnesses there. So Gylby lived on for another 30 years. He died on the 20th of June, 1961 in Galston in Suffolk. And this is his probate here. And so it went to Betty Elizabeth Haresign, his widow, effects £25,930 and 1 shilling. So what helped me in my own research? So the chart I created for Rosa, the Rosalindas, I used something called Lucid Chart. That is actually a paid tool that you can use online, but I find it very useful, and I've kept that up for quite some time, and I use it for lots of different charts. I actually found Gylby's paternal family via someone else's ancestry family tree there. I used FreeBMD to find information on births, marriages, and deaths, newspapers.com and the British Newspaper Archive, and something called unithistories.com, which is not one that I've come across before. And that gave me military information about Gylby's nephew, who was awarded the Military Cross. So it's like there wasn't just him in the military, some of his other close relatives did that. And the image that I found of that boat was taken from Getty Images there. So that's it for today. Any questions?
Probably not a question. Absolutely fascinating to see those naming patterns. I'm sort of always interested to see naming patterns, but that was an unusual one. And did you ever find out where the Gylby name came from? Was it a surname?
I think it must have been a surname. It was
Yeah,
from Yorkshire, but I
yeah,
didn't really go back much further than the grandfather,
yeah,
to be honest. And
yeah,
the name changed beyond that. It wasn't, his
yeah,
father wasn't Gylby. So I
yeah,
just thought, okay, it must have been something where somebody married in, I'm presuming, and they wanted to keep the
yeah,
surname going.
yeah. And then not to mention hair sign, that's more unusual again. Very,
Yes.
very unusual. That was great. Thanks, Emma.
I agree. It's always fun to see these kinds of naming patterns. Um, I remember asking my mom why I was named Barbara when my sister and brother are clearly named for beloved, great aunts and uncles and great grandparents and so on. To which she answered, "I don't know. I just like the name." Oh, so disappointing. Um, I'm
It could have been
still.
somebody fashionable at the time or something. Was there a singer or
So
something
she
like
would
that?
tell me, or maybe it was someone fashionable who did something dreadful and she didn't want to talk about it. So I'm always looking for the mysteries in these things. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I actually
maybe.
know that I'm not the first Emma Cox in my tree. So I have a great aunt, 3 or 4 generations, 3 or 4 times great aunt who's Emma Cox. So
Good.
that was quite fun to find out. But
Yeah,
looking at other names in the tree, you can definitely see patterns where the names are repeated. So I've got Umpteen
Yeah.
Williams, Edwards. Um, my dad's first name's Anthony. That is less common, but there are a few. But William is one that has been repeated endlessly, and
Yeah.
Harriet as well. And
And
there's all sorts of things in there.
when you have those that are repeated endlessly, do you have a source as to who the important person was that they were remembering?
So the Williams, I think, come from lots of different places, but I can trace it back to Charles Cox was my about 4 or 5 times great grandfather, maybe slightly further than back in Taunton. He called one of his children William Charles, and then one of his children was William, and so that went down. And then we had Edward William Cox and William Cox, and my great grandfathers with the pedigree collapse bit there. So there's bits there on that particular line, but I think there's also bear in mind things like the names of the royalty at the time. So who was
Yeah.
on the throne? who was popular, who was a singer or something like that, depending on how recent it is. I mean, you get some very strange spellings of names in the 21st century, late 20th and 21st century.
Yeah.
But equally, things have fallen out of fashion. You also hear things like where people were named after battles in wars. That's actually a thing, and I was talking to somebody about that recently. So that you'll find there's nothing in the family about it, but a person was named after a battle.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
Like Trafalgar.
Yeah.
Hey, wow.
Or Nelson. You get lots of people who are called
Yeah.
Nelson after Lord Nelson and things.
Yeah. Wow. Is that true in Australia as well, Jennifer?
Not so much the battles, but definitely the royalty. But when my children were born, so looking at the 70s, late 70s, William, George, all the royal names, they were just weird. People thought when Diana had William, people here could not believe that she called him with a name like William.
It wasn't actually a fashionable name here at the time either, because I can remember thinking that with the children, just thinking, oh, that's quite old-fashioned, isn't it? And just okay, it's obviously named after somebody a few generations back or whatever. But
but it's become, since then, it's become just a normal name, you know. But I was named after Jennifer Jones, the movie star.
Oh, there you go.
So, yes. And talking about naming patterns, why I'm really interested is my father's family. My father's Thomas Lloyd. His great-grandmother was Martha Lloyd. So every male child in that family for generations has the middle name Lloyd. So Dad has 8 brothers, you know, Thomas Lloyd, Charles Lloyd, they're all Lloyd. And as it goes down, the families are large, and all the children of that large family, male named Lloyd, their children, male name, it goes right to today. They're still to today.
Wow.
The interesting thing is that there's no, I haven't come across a Christian named Lloyd. So it's obviously not important enough for that. But there was one family who had no boys, so they called their daughter Martha Lloyd.
Wow.
So yeah, it was very important to them along the line, you know.
Right. Well, isn't Lloyd a distinctly Welsh name, as is Jones?
Yes. Yeah, and it's spelled LLWYD.
Right.
Yeah, it is. So I would say originally it's to keep the Welshness in the family. But it's interesting because the generations now, they don't even know about that. But they're continuing it on. Yeah.
That is what I consider an opportunity for a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what you're also saying is, if you're trying to identify people and you know you've got people who've got Lloyd as a middle name, and you suddenly come across somebody who wasn't part of the family, you suddenly think, okay, well, it's quite likely that they are actually part of that family. Yeah.
Exactly.
Then working out where to slot them in when they're all William, Thomas, you know, all those names. So it's interesting.
At least they varied it, and they didn't have somebody with the same name, father, son, grandson, all the same name going down, which is a nightmare to actually try and work out which the correct one is when you come across all the different records.
Right.
That's right.
And I wonder about, 50 years from now, when the kinds of tools that we routinely go and look in, so what was your great grandfather's name? And then you run over to Family Search or Ancestry or whatever. And say, well, they're here, right? Those, one would think, will be more and more richly populated 50 years from now. And our whole approach to making these kinds of familial connections will be different. Interesting. Bill, feel free to chime in. I gather you'd have are just chatting in text, but feel free to join the conversation. We're perfectly happy to read and appreciate your comments. I wanted to share a story that kind of, for me, got me interested in these naming patterns, which was my husband's family. So my husband, as you may know from my last name, is Chinese. And his family, when our daughters were born, my father-in-law says, and we will get you the middle name. Actually, what he said is, we will help you with the Chinese name. What I didn't know is that meant they would tell me what the middle name was. Oh, so the reason for this, again, I did not know this, was that in like 600 BC, something like that, way back in time, the family had one of the ancestors had written a poem, very long poem. And each character, and you understand how Chinese works, each character would be captured as the first character in what is usually a 3-character name, a given name. So the given name would be 2 characters, the last name is 1 character. So someone's name is frequently 3 characters long, last name first, then the 2 characters of the given name. So for Western families, they will often have their American names, American given name, usually 1 name, and then their Chinese name, which would be in English the middle name. But then from Chinese perspective, it's their Chinese name, last name and the 2 characters.
Yeah.
So father-in-law was like, I will tell you the name. And that's because he had, for generations, as the eldest in the extended family, been making selections for the names in ways that were fortuitous, that were auspicious, based on time of day, what we would think of as kind of zodiac symbols, time of day, place of birth, that kind of thing. So each of our daughters, and every single Tien member of a Tien, if the last name is Tien and the middle initial is Z, or you take that same character and look at what it would be in the other romanization system. So we often typically use pinyin. Wade Giles was the older thing that we all grew up learning when we were before China opened. And so, any other Tien with a name Z, probably the same generation. My husband's is T. And it's fascinating. Of course, you don't see the name
Yeah.
very often, but in his family's area of China, Huangpi area, it's actually outside of Wuhan, that no one had ever heard of Wuhan back in the day. But yeah, there's lots of Tians, lots of Tians. So it just goes to show that how these kinds of naming patterns taken at scale
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
really meaningful. I thought this
Yeah.
idea of a poem was extraordinary. It turns out lots of Chinese families do this.
Oh, right.
And so the poem is very long. My father-in-law pointed out, like, yeah, we pretty much just watched the first 12 characters of the poem and then recycle those. Because I mean, who's to keep up with 12 generations?
When you think of naming conventions in other countries, the Scandinavian countries and Iceland and things like that, their son or daughter and things like that, and that makes tracing things not easy because people's surname is literally different. It's not the same as their parents' name.
Yeah, we've had Anna Schutz, who has been active in Project Kin, and I'm sure she'll be back. She gets tied up with things. Is a local correspondent with many Americans and Canadians from Sweden, because of course she speaks both English and Swedish. Worked for many years in Britain, and provides a lot of that kind of dig into the records to figure out what those surnames are and those family names are, because I guess they are the pater names. I can't remember how that works exactly, but just carrying those forward to generations, like, what the heck? Who is which? You can have long-lived great-grandparents and short-lived children. So when you follow those names, how do you know who's who?
Yeah. And another naming pattern from France, in my family's instance, is the one name study I've got. My ancestors, they're actually called Fonblanc, Fonblanque, and as I mentioned earlier on in various other presentations. But their surname was Grenier, and he was the seer, so he was like the local nobility of Fonblanc. So he was Sieur Grenier of Fonblanc, and it turned into being Fonblanc being the surname. So at one point, it's like Fonblanc stops completely, and it goes to a completely different name going further back. And then that is there were Sieurs of different places, and so you then get those surnames, and then at one point the generations all stop, and it goes back to being Grenier above that.
Ah, yeah.
Interesting.
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 Yeah.
Wow. I'm just starting to scratch the surface on my dad's family. I have found a cousin. I'm very excited to finally meet this weekend. And the Reese family, Ries, in Switzerland. So that name is pretty common in different parts of Germany, but in Switzerland, it's all in one town, Glarus. And so looking forward to digging in.
Yeah.
It's fun finding out what the customs are in different countries, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the things that I think has such potential with what we do here, is Project Kin extending, even just limiting it to the English language, from Britain, all of Britain, to Canada, America. We've joked many times about the shocking similarities as former colonies, to Britain and what our experiences are. And I honestly do hope one day that our instantaneous translations will be enough to be good enough that we can maintain these kinds of conversations, despite language differences, and have a chance to have guests from Switzerland talk about their family history in ways that we can follow along. There's no reason that language should be that barrier when so many of us have family lines that extend across the planet, because travel.
Yeah.
And the further back in history, the more likely you are to find different languages.
And actually, from America, it's almost the opposite. The closer in history you go, the more likely you are to find people from around the planet because of the distances to travel, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot of Spanish speakers in the United States, but also during the late 19th century, you have a lot of Europe. There were just different phases of immigration to this country that just related to different periods, and it is still a very large country. The same thing for Australia. It's still a very, very large country. I mean, learning to speak Vietnamese was not a thing. But now, the San Francisco Bay Area is one of these little pockets of very large Vietnamese populations. And, there's a lot of wars got in the way, a lot of other noise got in the way, but we're still families and we have stories to tell. And as those barriers come down. Go ahead.
So when I was at school, there were a lot of the kids with the strange names that we thought back then were mostly from Yugoslavia. And most of the immigrants that came to Australia in the recent times were coming from trouble. And so there were the Yugoslavians and the Italians were there were the kids at school that couldn't speak English. And we had the Greeks were there around about a little bit later that bought us the fish and chip shops. The Italians bought us the coffee. And, then we had that because Australian was very meat and tree veg back before this. So we owe all our wonderful food to and traditions really now to these immigrants. And then after that, the Vietnamese came, a lot of Vietnamese. And, now today we've got Turkish and the different African countries. And you could almost plot a history of the world by, who arrived in Australia when. And of course there's after World War II too, the Jewish, many Jewish, so it's interesting.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. In many ways, for all of the noise and politics and fights and so on that goes on, like above in the surf above us. Down
Yeah.
here, we are families, and we
Yeah.
care about good food, and we care about each other, and we care about
Yeah.
neighborhoods and those
Yeah.
kinds of things. And again, all of that politics aside, at the end of the day, I mean, here in I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. San Francisco itself, for whatever weird reason, became a hub for what were called White Russians, Russians who emigrated from Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution.
Mm,
So
right.
this was in, 1917, 1918. There's a large Russian community, fabulous food.
Yeah.
Not to mention what you think of for San Francisco, perhaps, is our Chinatown. Well, that's because of the railroads that ended here. And oh, yeah, the Pacific to get here. So those kinds of things were foundational to
Yeah.
what became of California. Oh, yes, of course, California wasn't American until the
Mm,
middle of the 19th century, not that long ago. It was
no.
part of Mexico, and before that, it was part of Spain. So when we just scratch the surface to history, we don't find a lot of buildings, but we do find Spain,
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. And yeah, it's again politics today. Don't want to go to. But
No.
just looking at what that has meant for communities. We have a huge Afghani community just
Ah,
down the bay. It's just one little
yeah.
town. And I
Yeah.
agreed to meet a friend, my startup days, I agreed to meet a friend at a restaurant I just picked out of the map in the early days of Google Maps or whatever. And we met at this place. I'm sure, Afghani, why not? It was a massive hall. There was nobody there. We walked in, each of us separately later times, and all by myself. So somebody comes out and brings me tea. Okay, what's happening here? It turns out it's a community hall that would be used for
Oh,
weddings and whatnot.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
a little difference in translation. They didn't quite know how to place it on the map and how to describe it. But there I was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To me, those kinds of immigrant experiences that are
Yeah.
kind of shared with a community are
Yeah.
tomorrow's family history, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah. Yeah.
families start to tell those. And I grew up
Yeah.
in largely in Hawaii, where white people from the mainland were the later generation to arrive, because certainly the Hawaiians had been there, and some number of wealthy who became wealthy white. They were missionaries, but became big landowners. But then you had the people who would work in the fields from the Philippines, from Japan, from China, and then after statehood, you have a bunch of people coming from the mainland. It was, layers.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what history is, though. History is layer upon layer, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All we need is an ogre and a donkey to talk about parfait. Nobody don't love parfait. Well,
So
there's,
I've been going back to my hometown,
huh?
to have mum out every week, and it's 20 years since I left, which is not very long, but it's changed a bit. So you mentioned this, what reminded me, you mentioned the Afghanis. There's a large Afghani community there now. And you know how in little small housing areas, I don't know about over there, but here we always had a milk bar on the corner, before supermarket. Yeah, milk bar. Do you know milk bar? Just a corner
What's
shop,
milk? Oh,
a corner
what we
shop
would
that
call
sold milk and bread and newspapers and
a
everything.
bodega, as they call them in New York.
Oh, they are, yes, exactly. And our first trip to America, I had no idea what a bodega was at first, and I thought, oh, it's a milk
I
bar.
know.
So they all closed down, these milk bars, when the supermarkets became 24-hour and, took over.
Hmm.
Um, so these Afghanis are all setting up little grocery stores in
Yeah,
Afghani grocery
yeah.
stores in these closed down milk bars, and you know, in a little strip where there might be 3 or 4 shops that have all closed down, you'll have the grocery store, and a shop might be used as a community centre, and a doctor, an Afghani doctor might be there. And, you know, it's just, I just think it's wonderful. It just adds an extra layer to this town that has always, like our town, we always had the immigrants, you know, like I said, the Greeks, the Italians.
Right.
Well, now we
Right.
have the
And specialized food needs like halal or kosher
yeah,
also tend to bring that kind of, because you can't eat if you can't eat kosher, and you can't
yeah,
eat halal. So
yeah,
you need someone to bring in the cultural elements to ensure that the food uh, can be shared. We have
yeah,
here major, a major university at Berkeley, so there's a lot of foreign students who will come here to study, and we have the Pakistani halal market next to it, and
yeah,
yeah, they'll serve both both Indian and Pakistani foods in the same way that many of the Japanese restaurants are actually run by Koreans who grew
yeah.
up in Korea during the period of Japanese colonization. I mean, it's really
Ah,
awkward when you look back over
yeah,
history and you see these
yeah,
conflicts, but they're, hey, I gotta make some money. I'm a silk merchant or whatever it is, I'm
yeah,
making some money here.
yeah,
You got to
yeah,
respect that. There, and
yeah,
again, all that noise is up there. We're just down
yeah,
here being a family.
yeah,
Love that.
absolutely. And when my daughter came back from Japan, she was an exchange student for a year.
Oh, that's
I
right.
wanted to be able to cook for her. I had no idea how to cook Japanese, but I had to drive to Melbourne, like a 2-hour drive, to buy ingredients in those days for her. Now I'd be able to go down to probably the local supermarket would have a lot of those ingredients, whereas it
Yeah.
wasn't hers then. Yeah, yeah,
There are actually there's an online service that has specialized in those foods of, you know, foreign food
yeah,
ingredients delivered to
yeah,
your home,
yeah,
specializing, I think, in Asian foods. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful
yeah.
thing.
It is. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, why don't we go ahead and take this as a wrap with a smaller
yeah.
group? It's always a little shorter. I want to thank you so much, Emma, for a delightful conversation. And Bill, thank you so much for joining. And of course, Jennifer, as always. Any tips on next month? Next month will be, these are always the third Thursday. Are we at the
Yeah,
third Thursday? Yeah, we are.
yeah,
Third Thursday of the month, which means that in July, we are on July 17th. And looking at my magic calendar, uh, one of the things that I just love about this series is the way Emma is always exploring her own family tree to discover these same patterns or something that we can all kind of do with our own. And yet we hear about at least for me as an English speaker growing up, a part of history that I always heard something about at a distance. So it's always fun to hear and to see.
yeah.
Thank you for that. And I haven't decided on my next month's one yet, so I will, watch this
I'll
space.
start slipping you curiosities of
Mhm.
Britain and see where that goes.
Mhm.
I did have one quick question though. You mentioned the free BMD. What is that?
Yeah.
So it's called Free Births, Marriages and Deaths, free BMD, literally, if you type that in, and you can put someone's information in there, and it's actually really good for searching. So you can put someone's surname and a maiden name if you want to. You can put 2 people, find a marriage, you can births, marriage and deaths. You can find all
Wow.
sorts of different things in there. The searching is actually quite clever. You can reverse it. So if you want to find a marriage and you don't know the person's Christian names, if you put the details in there, you can put both surnames in, and then if you put them the other way around, you've got the right people. So sort of start with searching for the man first and then for the spouse, and then do it the other way around, and you can confirm people's there. It's also actually really good for looking for living people. You have to be a little bit careful on this one, but you can find details if you put in there, for example, you can tick marriage and birth, and then you can say, right, this couple married then, and you've got all of these people, and it's got the person's the child's maiden name, and in the right area, and all of a sudden you've got a family. And that is available for people who are still alive. So just have a look and see what you can discover on there. But it's a really good resource, and it's not fully complete. There are gaps in it.
What
but
is
it's definitely
the
worthwhile.
years? How far back does it go?
Civil registration.
Which was
1850s, 1830s even. Hang on a moment, I'll get it up.
Yeah.
Hang on.
1836 was it?
freebmd.org.uk is the link. 1837.
Yeah.
So they've got information 1837 to 1999. But they've not transcribed everything, and they've got that in capital letters on their homepage. So you will find things missing, but it can be really useful there, and it can actually help you then go and actually request a copy of something. So you can get copies of birth and death certificates from the General Register Office there afterwards.
I see. Terrific. Thank you. That was one last question I hadn't asked. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And I'll be getting this video up as usual within a couple of hours. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on what happens.
Good.
Thank you so much.
You. Thank
All
you.
right,
Thank
you
you.
take care now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you again, Bill. Lovely to see you.